Coven's Blood, Markandeyi's Rise to Power by Adom Sample. Monologue. Tend to me well, for I will not bless you with the luxury of further announcement. This is but a mere warning for the faint of heart or those who would indulge themselves in false senses of morality. I am Markandeyi, the founder and ruler of the Coven of Vampyres. Make no mistake, ladies and gents, you will not like me. Lust and blood are the codes I live by, and the proclamations for which I birthed the Coven, my Coven, are thus: vampires are the future. The time of man is ending, and why not? The weak and decrepit finality of man are mere vessels to be slaughtered through hunt or intercourse. It is through my will the armies of man crumble, chewing the naked flesh of despair. Blood runs through my fingers as I suck the last drops of all those who oppose me from their hemorrhaging veins. What I do is for the strong to decide. All history is told by those who make it. And who makes such history, you ask? I'll answer your query with the deepest honesty I can muster, without shame or reticence. Killers, usurpers, and tyrants. Those are the manufacturers of history. But I, Markandeyi, am no mere killer with bloodthirsty images that tweak sexual arousal. No. I am the beginning and end of those who would call humanity benevolent. I, like many before me, am a force of nature. A new state of evolution, if you will. That which is many is all that I'm bound to. The highest of realms vested the power in me to rule the world through sex and blood without emotional attachment. As I mentioned earlier, you will not like me. And that distaste is all I require from humanity. The masses must despise me. Hate and fear will mark the end of their existence. As I gaze into the innocents' eyes and absorb their blood unto myself, I become enlightened. My bloodlust obsession is what bore the new state of the world, the Coven of Vampyres' birth. The look of horror on the faces of my victims is what I crave most. Subjugation through power alone is all that matters in this world. These urges consume me, as will they for all those who follow me into this glorious new future. My bloodlust is what makes me great. It gives me power over my victims, a high that trumps all others. The weight of morality is a consequence I bear no more. Some may think me evil, but what you must understand is that evil is a simple point of view. Would you kill a newborn to save 6 innocents? Would it be considered evil to kill them all? Look deep into the bottom of your soul and think about what you could be capable of doing. Now look into others' hearts and know what they would be willing to do if death were imminent. Does that place frighten you? If it does, then you may leave your bleeding heart in the darkness of sorrow to be slaughtered by the new world I will create. If, however, you are intrigued, stay and follow me through this journey. For this will be an enlightening experience where your darkest fears and most rogue instincts will take hold and set you free. I will captivate you with my bloodlust for conquest. The Coven of Vampyres is to be born this day. I am Markandeyi the First, and I want you to hate me. Chapter 1. The Last of Humanity. The time of man is at its end. Your bodies are a prison, a mere basin for the new race to feed from. Hand yourselves over to us and set your souls free from the harshness of this world, said Ohas Carvalho, my Myrmidon, to the last human survivors of the Greek-Turkish United Republic. For 100 years after the meteorite struck the Earth and forced all 7 continents to merge into one supercontinent, the remaining population who'd survived that devastation had attempted to rebuild the world they'd lost. The fate of the human race rested in the hands of those who were willing to do what it took to stave off extinction. The rising oceans from the impact had nearly obliterated my home on the Horn of Africa. I, like many others, had died that day. But what most would call doomsday, I called final judgment. I understood what the meteorite meant. From the grips of death's claws, I'd emerge from the bottom of what used to be the Red Sea, born anew, born a vampire. I, Markandeyi, was the first vampire. While crawling to the shore and coughing the water out of my lungs, I had an epiphany beyond the human condition. A century had passed, and I had returned from the dead as an immortal being. I'd gazed at my surroundings that day in disbelief. Why had I come back when so many had perished? I dropped to my knees and stared at my water-wrinkled hands, contemplating my purpose. It was then I discovered my reason for being. There was only one truth to be realized, one course of action that needed to be taken. And here I stood before the last human city-state, finalizing my destiny. The end of humankind was now. "I'd rather die than give up my humanity," shouted a man from the crowd. My militia of soldiers surrounded the hundreds of humans we'd cornered in this massive cave. The Greek-Turkish United Republic had fallen, and these succulent humans were all that was left. Ohas aimed his spear at the human and growled. The glowering red eyes of my militia instilled fear in all those wretched humans. Standing upon high on a mountain of rocks, I placed my hand on Ohas's shoulder and pulled him back. "Convert or die. Those are the only choices you have left. Humanity is dead," I said brazenly. "Impossible. There are thousands of us," screamed a woman standing beside the man. "Vampires. They are all vampires now and forever," exclaimed my militia in unison. The crowd quivered in fear. A blue aura surrounded my body as I exhibited my power for the masses to see. I descended from the rocks, making my way towards the couple who had so bravely expressed their defiance. They clutched each other's hands and began to sweat with apprehension. "Why do you look so sad? What I offer is immortality. A life of hedonism is beckoning. All you have to do is take it. Shed yourselves of this weak flesh. Join us in eternity," I said. "I'll never be a vampire. Do you hear me? Never!" bellowed a man from farther back in the crowd. "You're either vampires or food. Make your choice," exclaimed Ohas. My militia moved in with their weapons at the ready. "If you kill us, you'll have no one left to drink," said the woman before me. I held my hand out as a peace offering. "As I have said, a hedonistic world awaits you. We've developed synthetic blood that can nourish you just as well as the real thing. No one needs to die ever again. I offer you a world without sickness, without death, without pain. Do you want to spit in the face of that offer?" The man and woman gazed at each other uncertainly. Murmurs could be heard throughout the cave. "The gods of humanity have abandoned you. Worse yet, it's my belief they never existed at all. We are the gods now. We are the powerful." I took the woman's hands and pulled her away from her companion. "As we are the righteous, the vampire is the new race born out of man's destruction and chaos," I continued. "What will become of us if we refuse?" Her voice trembled. I gazed into her companion's eyes and tossed aside her hair. The man and I stared at each other as my fangs neared the neck of my victim. "For you, my child, there is no repudiating. You are already mine." I sank my fangs into the woman. She gasped, wrapping her arms around me tightly. "You bastard!" screeched the man before lunging at me. Ohas seized the man. "Watch her die," he said, licking his fangs sadistically. The crowd screamed in horror, but my militia ensured they had nowhere to run. While I applauded Ohas's actions, I didn't intend to kill this woman. Each one before me would witness the glory of becoming a vampire firsthand. The last thing this world needed was more dead humans. We would repopulate this earth in my image. The more converts we had, the better. "Please, she's my daughter. Just let her go. Take me, I beg you," the man pleaded. "Oh, I'm sure our Lord intends to take you," said Ohas, "as well as every other human in this cave. Now be quiet and watch as our Savior sucks the life from your offspring." The woman's heartbeat faded. Gulp after gulp I drank. The sweet essence of her filled me to the point where I didn't want to stop. Her arms fell from my body and became limp. I released my fangs from her tender skin before slowly placing her on the soiled ground. "You're dying. The heart that beats in your chest cavity is weakened by the second." With the claw on my pinky finger, I made an inch-long incision down the middle of my wrist. "Drink, my child. Drink and never face death again." Panting, she opened up her mouth and allowed the droplets of my blood to trickle onto her tongue. "No!" shrieked her father. My blood flowed into her mouth, giving her the strength she'd lost. She took my arm and enveloped her lips on the incision, sucking more and more. "You can't do this!" the man continued to shout. "It is already done," I whispered. An aura emitted from the woman's body. She threw my arm away and inhaled sharply, and change overcame her. "Witness the marvel of the vampire. Witness glory," said Ohas. The woman's body levitated from the ground. The glow emanating from her shone brightly, and it shocked every human who gazed upon it. Her transformation was underway. Soon they would all succumb to the nirvana of becoming a vampire. The blue aura faded, giving way to a luminescent white light. The stage was nearly complete. "What have you done? Why? Why?" screamed her father. "Allowing her to suffer illness or wither away from old age is the ultimate cruelty," Ohas said. "What Markandeyi has given your offspring is the greatest gift in all the universe, not death but life." The glow faded, and the woman opened her now soft gray eyes. With new vampire senses, she breathed air deep into her lungs and exhaled slowly. All melanin from her hair and skin had vanished. The woman's entire body had turned the color of snow. She was beautiful. "Rise, my child," I said softly. She smiled, revealing her newly formed fangs. Ohas nodded and released her father, tossing him to the ground. The crowd gazed at us with a loss for words. They'd witnessed something magnificent, something they couldn't quite comprehend. I feel amazing, powerful," the woman exclaimed. Ohas took her right hand and pressed her knuckles against his forehead. "Welcome to a new beginning," he said. She caressed Ohas's hair gently. "I can feel your every fiber. I can sense all there is about you. Is this what it means to be touched by God?" she asked. Ohas backed away. I took her hand in mine. "There is no God, my child. There are only us," I said calmly. "That I believe," she responded. "What have you done to my daughter? She's all I had left," shouted the man kneeling on the ground. "Dad, please. This is nothing like we were led to believe. I've never felt closer to heaven than now," she said. "No, these demons have made you one of them," the man said tearfully. I knelt and stared into his watery eyes. The only demons that exist are those who dwell in the human heart. I saw this evil firsthand in my youth. War, famine, death, a nuclear apocalypse that threatened to destroy every human being on Earth. And what came after that meteorite struck the planet? The Great War. More war, more death, more suffering. The only thing that united humanity and brought about the Great Peace was a common enemy, the vampire. You humans may have called it peace, but I and those like me called it genocide. What has man wrought in this world but misery? I am the remedy for all that you've suffered. The actions fashioned by man will be no more. I bring true peace, a true paradise. The Coven of Vampyres will unite all living beings in this world. We will live forever in a heaven created by my hand. Life or death, the choice is yours, I proclaimed. I'll never become a blood-sucking monster like you, the man whispered. I shook my head and gazed up at his daughter. A thirst had a hold of her. I noticed it by the way her hands were shaking. She needed to feed, and soon. This was the perfect opportunity. Death it is, I said. With the claw of my index finger, I slashed the man's right cheek. Blood dripped slowly from the wound, enticing the bloodlust of his daughter. Drink, I called to her. The crowd gasped. He looked swiftly at his daughter in horror. The woman's fangs overlapped her bottom lip as she drew nearer to the blood dripping from his face. Miria, what are you doing? The man shuddered. Her eyes burned red with thirst. I took a few steps back and watched. A point had to be made. Miria, Miria, he shouted. The crowd backed farther away, closer to the walls of the cave. He's right, Dad. The time for humanity is over. All I've ever known is suffering. If Markandeyi brings peace and eternal life, who are we to condemn that? She said. The blood continued to drip from his face. Miria licked her fangs while inching closer to him. Those aren't your words. Those are the words of this demon, the man screamed before he launched at me a second time. With vampire speed, Miria wrapped her arms around her father's body and plunged her fangs into his neck. Miria, he bellowed. I smiled brightly, as did Ohas. Miria, stop, the man shouted. The more he struggled, the more ferally she drank. Within moments, the man collapsed to the ground as Miria continued to gulp his essence away. This is the future he promised you all. A future of death, a future of evil and oblivion, a world where daughter is turned against father. The man gasped before falling unconscious. Miria sucked, gulped, and drank until he stopped breathing, until there was nothing left. Rejuvenated, she stood and gazed with me with vampiristic delight. "More," she requested. I nodded and turned my attention to the crowd. "Be one with me, or be one with him," I said, pointing to the corpse at my feet. Every man, woman, and child in the cave knelt before me. It was done. The last of humanity subjugated themselves before my grace. The Coven of Vampyres was one step closer to completion. "Can I have one of them?" asked Miria. I caressed her hand and gazed into her beautiful, gray eyes. "In due time," I said. "No one ever told me that being a vampire would be so invigorating," she exclaimed, stretching her arms in the air.
"How does it feel?"
shouted a woman from the crowd. Ohas and my militia were rounding them up for transportation to the conversion centers I developed a decade earlier. Miria looked at the woman in euphoric bliss. "Being a vampire feels orgasmic," she responded.
"No, I mean, how does it feel to kill your own father?"
the woman bellowed. Miria brushed me aside and approached her. One of the guards had the woman's arms locked behind her back in preparation for transport. Eyes tearful, she stared daggers at Miria while struggling to get free. Miria flicked the woman's hair and laughed. "That man you see lying on the floor deserved his fate. He'd been molesting me since I was a child. I wasn't lying when I said all I knew was suffering, unthinkable suffering inflicted by his hands. I took my vengeance poetically. What I did was something the weak human me could never do. Now that I'm immortal, I have no need for a perverted father. As Markandeyi said, we are the gods now." The guard dragged the woman away as Miria snickered. I approached her from behind and placed my hand on her shoulders. "I want you to be by my side at all times. I will teach you the ways of the vampire," I whispered. "And I'm eager to learn," she replied. Ohas took a final glance at us and smiled. "Not one human being should be left behind. Move it! Take them all!" Ohas shouted at the militia. The humans were rounded up speedily and transferred from the cave to the vehicles outside. Hand in hand, my newborn vampiress and I gracefully followed the last of the militia out of the cave. The time of the vampire had begun, and I would see to it the Coven of Vampyres reigned. Chapter 2. Joined. The wretched coils of humanity fell this day. I stood splendidly yet not furtively upon the throne that would reside in the center of the kingdom that I would call Verinia. Ere the wit of my esteemed colleagues who'd helped me lay claim to my rightful place as ruler of them all, I sat with Miria by my side and gifted upon them what they'd so rightfully earned. In the alcoves of our daily plunders sat abound the sexual delights of the vampire. Rooms filled to the brim with lust and flavors known only to those who would serve the Coven of Vampyres without question awaited my allies. A scent of flesh soaked into my lungs. I gazed at the delicious, sweet blood dripping from the mouths and fangs of those who would partake in the orgy before me. It was playtime. Rest and relaxation awaited me. My lord, the last two covens have yet to concede. The Coven of Blood Moon, along with the Coven of Merlotica. They aren't willing to shed their independence, said Ohas. I sipped the blood from my glass and stared at him with annoyance. You dare interrupt my respite with talks of treasonous covens? I said firmly. He took a step back and bowed. Of course not, my lord. I apologize for disturbing you. As he backed away, I held my hand out, palm up, and curled my index finger at him. Wait, Ohas. Please come and have a seat, I said more calmly. With his gaze lowered, he approached my throne and sat on the chair closest to my own. Do you know the location of Emmanuel? I asked him. Emmanuel, my lord? Yes, Emmanuel Lascar de Font. That young man I turned a few years ago. Have him set up a meeting with the leaders of the covens Blood Moon and Merlotica. Surely we can settle the final expansion peacefully. With humanity finished, I'm certain we vampires can come to a more enlightened understanding. The last thing anybody wants is war. Let the time of the vampire be the true great peace, I said. He nodded. Of course, my lord. Is there anything else you'd like me to relay for you? I handed him a glass of blood wine and exhaled. Not right now, my subject, although I'd like to see you enjoy yourself for once. Everything we've worked for is finally coming to fulfillment. The world will soon be at peace under my guiding hand. A society, a world free of pain, true hedonism, I said proudly. Ohas grinned, stood up, and shed his clothes. A few steps down from my throne seating, he joined the naked flesh of the masses enjoying themselves before us. I watched as 4 olive-skinned beauties with black hair and bright green eyes pressed themselves against his nude body and member. It was a glorious sight. The women pulled him to the floor and did as they wished with him. Ohas didn't fight or object. He allowed it to happen. "So, this is the way of the vampire?" asked Miria, with her arms crossed. Gone were the rags of dirty threads she'd donned in the cave where I'd turned her a month ago. Her appearance had been reborn into my image. I moved my head subtly in her direction and gazed at the luscious figure of her body. This beautiful newborn vampire would be mine, of her own choosing. I'd make sure of it. "Let it be said that I'm not too impressed by this display," she commented. I smirked. "And what would you be impressed by, may I ask?" My tone was playful. I wanted to know the inner workings of this woman. With the way she'd taken the life of her father, I needed to see more of her memories. I had to know what made her tick. Blood is what impresses me. You have no idea how long I've yearned for this freedom. To be honest, I never thought becoming a vampire would grant it to me. Still, the events that led me here can't be denied. I will embrace fully what I am. With you," she smiled. "So, what you were taught was malevolence turned out to be your salvation?" I asked. "As I stand here gazing at the massive orgy surrounding me in this room, it is evident that you're true to your word. We need not fear disease, the infirmities of old age, or death. My senses and strength have increased beyond anything I've ever dreamed of. Even with all this lying before my feet, the only thing I crave is blood," she confessed. "Well, if blood is what you want, then blood is what you will have. But only if you promise me one thing," I said. Her fangs protruded as she rubbed my head with her soft, cold hand. "Speak your promise." "You may not know this, but a select few vampires in this world have gifts," I said. Her eyes widened. "Gifts?" "Yes. I am Markandeyi, the oldest living vampire on Earth. Do you know what that is?" I asked. "Tell me." The curiosity on her face was perceptible. "I'm the guiding light in the darkness of this world. I am the first vampire. Those I turn are bestowed with gifts, and those gifts will continue throughout their bloodline for all time. I made you, and now you have special abilities. When you became a vampire, your hair and skin turned white. As a vampire, you are one of the most beautiful angels I've ever seen. I can only surmise that you have the gifts of light bending and contact mind thought," I said. "What are those?" she asked excitedly. "With one gift, you'll be able to turn invisible, hence the name light bending. With the other, you'll be able to see the thoughts of any vampire with a single touch." She gazed at her hand in amazement. "Are you sure?" The smile on her face gave me pleasure. I've turned hundreds of humans into vampires since I emerged from the depths of my watery prison and realized what I was. I've logged and categorized all the gifts that have come from vampirism. It seems as if the gifts you have can only be bequeathed to women. As time passes, I'll show you how to use your gifts." Miria stepped in front of me and sat in my lap, licking her fangs. "How do you know that you're the first vampire?" she asked. "Before me, there were no other vampires. I stand above all those who carry the vampire gift. This reason falls within the domain of my abilities, as I can sense the presence of them all. I can feel the connection to our entire species. Be it vampires accompanying me in the same room or dwelling on the other side of the planet. When I arose, there were no connections to any vampires in my mind. Now, however, there are many. All gifts imparted upon vampires rest within me. I possess the power of all gifts. There is only one explanation for this phenomenon, Miria." My fangs began to extend. "And what is that?" she asked. Her attention to my words was unwavering. "That I, Markandeyi the First, am the god of all vampires," I said in a piercing tone so the pleasure-seeking masses could hear. Miria rubbed the back of her fingers on my right cheek and extended her fangs to full length. "So tell me, what promise does this god want from me?" she asked. "To be by my side and rule the Coven of Vampyres with me. You proved your loyalty and viciousness when you took the life of your father." Her jaw was earthbound. "Me? But what about all the other women you turned long before me? What about Ohas? Why me?" "Because, my child, I need a clean slate. I want someone I can teach our ways without preconceived notions of what they think I may desire. An independent mind is what I crave." Say you will rule this newly founded coven with me and help develop my empire. All of vampire kind must surrender to an aristocracy born from my will, one that is built on nobility, obedience, loyalty, and a strict rule of hierarchy. People need to be ruled, and I, Markandeyi, will rule them, with you by my side. So what is your answer? Will you make me this promise? I gazed into her eyes, awaiting whichever choice she'd give me. My lord, she climbed off my lap and knelt before me. I am your subject, to command for all time. This I promise you, Markandeyi, my god, she said with no hesitation. I reached over and ran my hand through her silky white hair. Then so it shall be, I proclaimed. The onlookers cheered in their lust-filled splendor. Soon the other covens would fall, and the rule of the Coven of Vampyres would ignite the flame of a new era. The bloodlust of my fortune had begun. Chapter 3. Meeting Between Covens. My lord, if you don't mind my asking, why do you want to hold this meeting during the day? Wouldn't it be much safer to wait until twilight? Asked Darius Aureus, one of the founding members of the Coven of Aureus. He'd convinced his leader and cousin, Daemonia Aureus, to pledge her allegiance to my cause, thus integrating his coven with my own. With Miria by my side, and Darius and Ohas sitting across from us, we entered the Shadowlands and undraped the black shades from our vehicle's windows. The forest gave off hints of blue and gray, which crossed between the sunlight hitting the trees above us. These lands would be the perfect setting to build the kingdom of Varinia, if it weren't for the infestation of dagger wolves. I gripped Miria's hand and turned my attention to Darius, who appeared wary. I suppose he was afraid of the sunlight breaking through the trees. You needn't worry about a thing, my friend. We're safe in the Shadowlands now, so don't be nervous. The sun will fall shortly. Soon the covens of Mirlotica and Bloodmoon will be no more, and we can finally begin to build a better world for all of us, I said. Darius gazed at Miria and me as the vehicle we were in drove through the rugged terrain of dirt and rock. My lord, forgive me for my confusion, but the Coven of Aureus still exists. Why do you say Mirlotica and Bloodmoon will perish? He asked. I smiled, revealing the sharp ends of my fangs. My plans are set in stone, dear friend. All covens, with the exclusion of the Coven of Vampyres, will eventually cease to exist. Gloom overcame his face as the shock of my words seeped into his consciousness. Markandeyi, when I swore my loyalty to you, you promised my coven would always have a place in your empire, he said fearfully. Miria grinned at Darius and leaned over to him. Why settle for a coven when you can have a kingdom? Taken aback, Darius stared at the both of us. His brow wrinkled. A kingdom, my lord? I'll explain more at the meeting. It is imperative that leaders of all current and former covens be there today. The formation of my empire begins now, I proclaimed. Ohas, who was quietly sitting next to Darius, listened to his radio for news of when the other leaders would arrive at the designated location deep in the Shadowlands. I sat back in my seat and gazed out the window, contemplating my centuries-long campaign of complete world order. All would soon bend to my will. My lord, Emmanuel has gathered the leaders of both covens as well as the covens who joined us, he said. The covens of Bloodmoon and Mirlotica are accompanied by bodyguards and a small group of fighters, said Ohas. I caressed Miria's thighs and smiled. Excellent. Excellent? Darius asked, confused. Yes. As I've said before, you needn't worry about a thing. All will be revealed soon, I reassured him. Miria kissed my neck and slipped my middle finger between her smooth white thighs. Ohas's and Darius's eyes were fixed on my hand. Deeper and deeper my fingers journeyed between Miria's legs. She began to moan when the tip of my middle finger met her dripping lips. With her eyes closed, Miria clutched my hand before I could go any further. This is not the place, she whispered sensually. So be it that I deemed when and where pleasure will be explored and enjoyed, I whispered. She gasped. Now tell me, Miria, did you relish in taking your father's life? I'd broken through her wet lips and pushed deeper into her pleasure chamber. She moaned passionately. Markandeyi, tell me how it felt to end his life, I said again. I can't. Tell me, I commanded, pushing deeper inside her. I loved it, she confessed. Why? I moved my finger in a twirling motion. Ah, she exclaimed. Why did you love it? Because he was a monster. And monsters deserve to be slain, correct? She dug her claws into my arm and squeezed her legs shut. Yes. And all those who would refuse perfect world order and peace and continue on the path of chaos and violence, would they too be considered monsters? Yes, my lord, she moaned, legs shivering. With all as my witness, every monster who opposes my will shall be slain this day, Maria inhaled sharply. I caressed her clit with my thumb and ran my middle finger in and out of her. Ohas's and Darius's fangs began to protrude as the vehicle stopped. We're here, my lord, said the driver. I withdrew my hand from between her thighs and licked my middle finger until her juices were no more. Delicious, I whispered to myself. The driver opened the passenger side door for Ohas. Maria pulled the black silk skirt she was wearing down to knee level and gazed at me. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know, but we would have to continue at a later time. Emmanuel opened my side door and greeted me with a smile. Welcome, Markandeyi, he said. Thank you, Emmanuel. I stepped out of the vehicle and adjusted the jet black robe that adorned my shoulders. With wide eyes, I surveyed the leaders before me. They were what I'd expected them to be, fragile and debauched. I approached them and nodded. Shall we begin? Chapter 4. Covens No More. This is pointless. Not one of us here will ever succumb to your tyrannical rule, shouted Green Dawn, leader of the Merlotica Coven. Everyone in attendance heeded his words with profound attention, much to my dismay. Green Dawn speaks the truth, said Gold Rose, his second in command. We value our independence. Humans tried and failed to eliminate us. We won't trade our newfound freedom for a dictator. The leaders of the Blood Moon Coven stood by in the background, murmuring among themselves. I attempted to keep my composure as their talk of treason gutted my nerves. I think you all are forgetting that if it weren't for Markandeyi, none of us would have survived the purge. This world would be mired in chaos, war-torn, and broken if it weren't for the sheer will of this man, said Emmanuel. Anyone who fancies themselves a god is no one I want ruling over me, said Green Dawn. And who, in turn, can deny the benevolence of the first vampire who stood against the humans and ensured our survival, asked Ohas. Green Dawn sighed. Let it be known, Markandeyi, that all of us here are grateful for what you've accomplished. We hold you in the highest respect, but— Respect, I interrupted. You speak of respect, yet here you stand plotting against my rule, I spat out vehemently. Gold Rose approached me, placing her soft hand on my shoulder. You may rule as you wish, Markandeyi, on your own lands. I threw her hand off me and growled. This world is my empire, and you, all of you, will bend the knee to it, I asserted. Are you not without reason? Asked Gold Rose. Everything our Lord has done is for the betterment of vampire kind. He brings about a new era of peace, true peace. Why won't you embrace it? Maria said. Daniel Caius, leader of the Blood Moon Coven, hissed dismissively. You are a newly born vampire. What do you know of vampire kind? Maria's fangs grew, and her eyes turned deadly red. More than you know, she said callously. Daniel rolled his eyes. And this weakness in placing your faith in the word of a woman is exactly why my coven believes you're unfit to rule us, Markandeyi. What is the word of a woman? They are to be slaves for our pleasure, not involved in political affairs, he said. His servant, Ariel, stood by and said nothing, but I could see the shame in her eyes. I'd mind my tongue if I were you, bellowed Gold Rose. I shook my head and elevated my feet a few inches above the ground, hovering in midair. These ridiculous views you hold have no place among vampires. The only weakness I see here is that the nonsensical beliefs that humans once held are still fresh in your mind. I suggest you rid yourself of them, I told him. Daniel snickered. I won't submit to the word of the weak, and nor will my coven. My blue aura swelled around my body as I propelled myself a few inches higher into the air. Is that your final word? I asked. Yes, it is, Daniel responded. And you, Green Dawn, are you in agreement with the leader of the Blood Moon? Green Dawn gazed around the room for a brief moment before responding. The Coven of Merlotica will stand alone as an independent entity without the rule from outsiders, he said. I smiled. Then so be it. You shall rule your covens as you see fit, from the grave. Gold Rose, Ariel, Maria, Ohas, Emmanuel, Darius, and the rest of my allies were instantly levitated from the ground by my hand. The dirt beneath our feet trembled violently. What the hell is going on? Shouted Daniel. Massive openings appeared below as dagger wolves dug from underneath them, snarling with hunger-ridden teeth. No! Screamed Green Dawn. Within seconds, the lower half of Daniel's body found its way inside the belly of a dagger wolf. Green Dawns and Daniel's guards shot in all directions to stop the carnage, but it was of no use. In the space of a few minutes, they were surrounded by the beasts. The sound of splashing blood, growling, chomping, and feasting rang all around us.
Green Dawn!
Screamed Gold Rose as she watched her leader's body be torn to pieces. She could do nothing. I encased her in an orb of energy, just as I had everyone else who needed to be saved from this fate. The dagger wolves crunched on the bones of those treasonous vampires, much to my delight. I reveled at the sight. It was glorious. I turned to Maria, who was laughing uncontrollably, and grinned. It seemed as if I'd made the right choice in keeping her by my side. Once the wolves had their fill, they burrowed back into the ground, leaving nothing but blood and pieces of flesh in their wake. Teary-eyed, Gold Rose hissed at me with her fangs in plain view. I knew it. I knew we shouldn't have met in the Shadowlands. This is your doing, you monster, she shouted. Monster, I chuckled. I've delivered you a kingdom to rule. How can a monster bestow such a gift? I shot a beam of energy at a device beneath a cloth in the rubble with my index finger, destroying it. We shouldn't expect any more dagger wolves from this point on, I said. What was that? Asked Emmanuel. A high-pitched signaling device. It drives the dagger wolves insane, said Maria. I erupted in laughter. You brought them here? Screamed Gold Rose. Yes. I knew your leaders would refuse the hands that provided them with the power they so enjoyed. Now, the rule of their people falls to you, as it does to you, Ariel, I said. With a wave of my hand, I sealed the tunneled holes in the soil. It's safe now, I assured them. We descended and placed our feet on the ground. You're a bastard, bellowed Gold Rose. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I retracted my fangs. Each one of you had better listen and listen well. This proclamation will reshape your way of life and the fabric of our world. We're listening, said Lydia, leader of the Red Song Coven. I exhaled sharply. The days of individual covens are over. Starting at this moment, consider your covens abolished. There will be only one true coven, the Coven of Vampyres. By my hand, I will build each of you a kingdom to rule, but make no mistake. The governing body of all kingdoms will follow the laws of the Coven of Vampyres. Gold Rose, you are hereby gifted the kingdom of Merlotica. Ariel, you are gifted the kingdom of Blood Moon. And each leader here will no longer refer to their namesake as a coven, but as a kingdom. Allow me to show you what I have birthed. The sun had given way to darkness, allowing us to reach beyond the shades of the Shadowlands. Using my power, I lifted the mass of us high into the air, past the trees and closer to the clouds in the sky. Marvel at what my followers have assembled for you, my loyal subjects. On the distant landmass of the earth stood 9 kingdoms under heavy construction. By the end of the year, each kingdom will be complete, Miria said proudly. All of you will have a place to rule. No more are you leaders of a coven. Now you are kings and queens under the proper guidance of a righteous Emperor Markandeyi the First. A lot of them gazed at the kingdoms in awe. I'd redesigned the world in my image. My achievement far exceeded that of any being in the history of this planet. That I held in the highest esteem. How long have you been working on this? Asked Darius, amazed. Years. For every turned human, another stone, another piece of metal and glass was put into creating these lands, and soon the development of the kingdom of Verinia, where I, the emperor of all that I survey, will rule from, will begin. How will we be protected from the sun? There's a reason no vampires journey beyond the safety of the Shadowlands area. It's too much to risk, asked Ariel. We have technology in development that will see to it that no vampire fears the rays of the sun under the safety of their kingdoms ever again, said Ohas. Slowly, I brought us down to the ground and exhaled with an accomplished grin. Now that you've seen the fruits of all my labor, what say you? Will you continue to live as vagabonds hiding from the sun with no place to call your own? Or will you take your rightful place as royalty? They whispered among one another for a moment and gazed at me. I take your offer, said Lydia of Red Song. I take your offer, said Anpiel of Corisa. I take your offer, said Layla of Civitas. As will I, said Barbiel of Jordania. You've relieved me of that barbarous fiend, Daniel. For that I am forever grateful, so yes, I'll take your offer, said Ariel of Blood Moon. What other choice do I have? I bend the knee to you, Markandeyi. I'll take your offer, said Safia of Dawn. The title of queen will suit me well. I take your offer, said Damonia of Aureus. And I too, said Cleatha of Academicus. All had spoken except for Melodica, Goldrose. Still filled with the emotional loss of Green Dawn, had her eyes affixed to the ground. "What say you, Goldrose?" I said firmly. She clenched her fists. "Green Dawn. He was the only family I had left. You killed my uncle. How do you expect me to kneel to a monster responsible for the death of the last person on this earth I loved? You made me watch as the beast ripped him to pieces. You made me watch!" screamed Goldrose before launching at me. Emmanuel caught her in midair. "Calm yourself, Goldrose," he said. "Not until his blood stains my hands," she shouted. Scratching and clawing, Goldrose struggled to free herself from Emmanuel's grip. Nevertheless, I knew just as she did that Emmanuel's gift of strength would see her stay right where she was. "Melodica must accept my offer. We cannot be one until all covens relinquish their cause and join my rule," I said. "How many have to die for this Coven of Vampyres to be established? How many souls?" screamed Goldrose with tearful eyes. "Submit to me, and no harm will come to anyone else. Your people will live under your rule as long as you follow the laws that will be outlined by my new coven. No, our new coven. Allow the memory of the past to die. A new era is born this day." "You expect me to forget about the death of my uncle, a death that you caused?" "The only thing I expect from you, Goldrose, is to kneel. If you continue to defy me, I will cause the death of more than just your uncle. Melodica will join or be no more." My voice was fierce. Emmanuel loosened his grip. Goldrose ceased her struggling and fell to the ground. "You truly are a monster," she wept. I snickered. "Monsters built empires," I countered. Wiping the tears from her face, she stood up and growled. Her eyes were red with a passion to kill. However, we both knew that the only thing she could do was bow. She gritted her teeth with extended fangs. "I accept your offer." Her voice was full of sorrow. I chuckled and bowed slightly as a gesture of thanks. "And so it is done. We will return to the grounds where Varinia will stand. There I will outline the laws and mandates that you will live by. The hierarchical bloodline will be established, as well as the rules of the Queen and the Count. Let us depart from this place. There is much to do," I said. The future queens bowed and retreated to their means of transportation. Goldrose locked eyes with me for a moment before turning her back on me and leaving. "Well played, my lord," said Ohas. I grinned with a sense of victory. Emmanuel walked past us towards our vehicle. "Will you be riding with us, Darius?" he asked. "No, I'll ride with Demonia. The Aureus clan needs to discuss a few details on our way back," he said. Emmanuel nodded and entered our vehicle. I followed suit and exhaled in relief. All was complete. I'd accomplished what I'd set out to do, yet still so much work needed to be done. Chapter 5. The Courting Moon is Born. Months had passed, and all was running smoothly. The kingdom of Varinia and the whole of the vampire kingdoms had been constructed. Ohas was made the Archduke of the Coven of Vampyres, a position he well deserved. Miria, with a bloodlust that matched my own, agreed to become my mate. Everything was well. I, Markandeyi the First, was emperor of the entire world. From the time I'd crawled out of the bowels of the sea, I'd thought of nothing else. This was my legacy. I was the god of gods. My rule would last an eternity. "My lord, come quick," shouted Emmanuel. My people scurried out of the throne room and past the palace walls. A shining blue light could be seen from the windows. Using my speed, I ran outside and gazed at the marvel not I or anyone on this world had seen before. "Well, what's happening?" said Miria, with fear in her voice. It appeared as if the moon were engulfed in blue flame. It was magnificent, and at the same time, unnerving. "The courting moon is born this day," said a feminine, divine voice that echoed seemingly across the globe. In a flash of light, the rays of the moon hit the earth, temporarily blinding everyone who gazed upon the burning blue sphere in the sky. And just as rapidly as the light appeared, it was gone. An aura fluttered in the sky before fading to nothing. This had to be a sign from the gods, a sign that I was meant to rule. "What the hell was that?" exclaimed Archduke Ohas. I breathed in slowly and approached the Archduke. "It was a sign that all is well in the universe. This must be a gift from the gods, proof that all I've done was fulfilling a prophecy. Come, let us return to our duties," I said. "Ah!" screamed pockets of people throughout the area we were standing in. Bursts of energy popped left and right from their chests. What followed haunted me, the smell of human blood. My mind had to be playing tricks on me, as there were no humans left.
Vampires are reverting to their human state,
screamed a woman from the crowd. Impossible! I shouted with my fangs fully extended. In haste, I approached a man who bore the same glow the moon had emitted. His skin was warm. The woman lying next to him had the same flush of blood in her cheeks. My mate. Is she okay? The man asked. They clutched hands and inhaled deeply. The glow from the moon intensified around their bodies. This can't be, I whispered to myself. I plunged my fangs into the man's neck and drank him dry. Miria approached from behind and finished the man's mate. Wiping her blood-stained lips, she gazed at me in confusion. What the hell is this? She asked. The moon. It has something to do with the moon, I said. Reversions can't happen. I refuse to go back. Humanity is dead, and it must stay that way, she said. I stared at the sky and that cursed moon. My power would not fade in the same breath that I'd obtained it. Reversion had to be stopped at all cost. I focused my attention on Miria. Running a hand through her white hair, I retracted my fangs and gave her a reassuring glance. You needn't worry, ever. I will find the cause of these reversions and put an end to them forever. The vampire will live on. That I promise you. She nodded tearfully. My lord, said the Archduke, there are a number of vampires here who have reverted in their human state. I'm sure the same holds true in the other kingdoms around the globe. What shall be done with them? Suppress all knowledge of this. I want a count from all kingdoms that have reverts. Have them transported to Verinia immediately, I said. What of the reverts here? asked Maria. I stood and wiped my lips clean of blood. Kill them all, I proclaimed. An animalistic grin formed on her face, revealing her blood-stained fangs. It's time to feed, she screamed for all to hear. The reverts wobbled to their feet as horror seared in their eyes. Miria and every vampire who'd missed the taste of authentic human blood flew at the reverts, fangs ready to gouge.
Wait, you can't do this. We're one of you,
a man screamed. And now your supper, hissed Miria. Screams echoed across the lands as the feeding commenced. While it weighed on my cold, still heart to kill those who were once loyal subjects, this had to be done. Anything that challenged my rule or the way of the vampire had to be destroyed. Soon I would discover the reason this happened, and I would crush it for all time. No matter the cost, I, Markandeyi, the god of all vampires, would see it done. For the Coven of Vampyres was eternal, as was I.